April 7th, 1987, Fairview Cemetery, Colorado Springs, Colorado. It's a warm spring day in a quiet cemetery. The caretaker notices a car parked at the edge of the property. He's seen the same car in the same spot for 4 days. He decides no one's coming back for the vehicle, so he calls the police to report it abandoned.
The patrol officer looks inside the car. He looks through the side window and sees something covered with a blanket.
That something is definitely not what he was expecting.
He sees a foot sticking from underneath the blanket.
A closer look reveals the bruised body of a young woman.
The body of the deceased had some signs of trauma, yet the evidence in the car did not indicate any sign of struggle within the car. So it was apparent to us that the death was caused somewhere else. And then the body was essentially placed into the vehicle and then transported to this location.
The county coroner determines the cause of death to be anything but natural.
She has abrasions of her neck, consistent with manual strangulation. She also has some abrasions that are consistent with her fighting off the perpetrator. This is common in manual strangulations. As the perpetrator puts their hands around the neck, the victim reaches up and grabs and scratches at their hands and scratches at her own neck to try to relieve the pressure. And that's what was seen in this case.
The case is ruled a homicide, and Lt.Joe Kenda takes over the investigation. The veteran detective has solved hundreds of cases, but this promises to be one of his most challenging.
This is an 18 to 20-year-old girl. She's a kid. Her life is just getting started and it's over. Violently. Sad stuff. We're in a sad business.
To Kenda, where the body is discovered is always revealing.
When you look at a crime scene, I'm most interested in how did our killer behave? What did he do? What did he do to kill the victim? What did he do before he killed the victim? Maybe what he did after. Those kinds of things speak to motivation. You want to let the facts drive the theory.
In this case, the car may hold valuable clues.
Whose car is this? Somebody drives it here. You have to assume our killer does. He's killed this person. Now he needs to get rid of them, along with this car. We have to assume the killer drove this car and parked it here to conceal the car and the body. The question is, did he leave behind any traces? The area where this car is found containing the victim is not commonly used by anyone for any purpose. It is just part of the cemetery property. Patrol officers that work that neighborhood don't recall ever having a call in that area regarding a disturbance or drinking or group parties where this car is located.
Investigators turn to the one man who may have seen something unusual.
We interview the caretaker who originally called it in. The caretaker is convinced that the car has been there for at least 4, maybe 5 days. The likelihood is great that this girl's been dead for some period of time.
Forensic investigators take latent prints from inside the car. Everything they find is smudged or partial. They do, however, find something else.
When we first looked at the blanket, there was hair on the blanket. It was very coarse, and I thought it might be dog hair. Human hair is relatively fine. This is very thick hair. So we wanted to collect that hair off that blanket and any other evidence that could be found.
In addition to the hair, police spot something on the dashboard.
One of the items the forensics investigators took out of the car was a piece of paper on the dash with the name Lisa and a phone number.
A run on the license plate shows that the car is registered to a 20-year-old woman named Vicki Lee Ross.
And my first thought was, okay, now we know who we're dealing with. It's probably her in the backseat of her own car.
A records check confirms Kenda's suspicions, But the question remains, was Vicki Ross killed here or somewhere else?
Vicki lived 35 blocks or so from where she was found. So she's not parked in her neighborhood. What is she doing there? Why is Vicki 35 blocks from home?
To answer that, Kenda turns to the victim's family. He learns that Vicki had been reported missing the day before.
The parents told us she was working in a supermarket at night. She was trying to save money. She wanted to buy a better car, but she never came home from work.
It's kind of like it was surreal. There's so much of that I think I don't remember just because it was just such a horrible shock.
I don't think they mentioned where she was. They just told me that, or told us that she had been murdered, and it's devastating.
Vicki's family says that the last time anyone saw her was as she was leaving her job at a local supermarket. Vicki had planned to meet her grandparents for dinner, but never showed up at their house. And that's when they called the police.
She loved her grandma and grandpa, that would be my parents, and liked spending time with them. She just was a joy, an absolute joy. And I miss her so much.
The news disturbs Lieutenant Kenda. Why didn't she call her grandparents to check in?
We had to wonder if the reason she never called anyone is because she never felt threatened. Maybe that's because she left work with someone she knew.
Playing a hunch, Kenda asks Vicki's family about the blanket found wrapped around Vicki.
We recognized early on that the blanket that she was wrapped in was a key piece of evidence, and one of the things that we needed to determine from the family is whether or not it was her blanket or not.
Vicki's family is adamant that she doesn't own a brown blanket.
No one could identify this blanket as having come from Vicki. It was clear that this blanket could be one link to the killer.
We felt that that was a key link. If we could find the source of that blanket, that would bring us closer to perhaps where she was killed.
But for right now, the blanket remains a mystery. The next day, an autopsy finds some surprising evidence that adds another twist to this investigation.
Autopsy of the body reveals tearing or breaking of the fingernails, consistent with the struggle that would happen near death, resulting in them breaking.
Her fingernails are broken back to the quick on a couple of her fingers. The coroner thought that a struggle had taken place in which Vicki probably broke her fingernails off on her attacker, trying to defend herself, and then was strangled.
The evidence suggests that the suspect will most likely have scratch marks somewhere on their body.
He also finds her pubic hair to be shaved quite recently, with swirling marks in the flesh, indicating to him the work was performed with an electric razor.
Autopsy revealed that the pubic hair of Vicki Ross had been crudely shaved, indicating that it likely wasn't her that did it.
The coroner estimates the time of death as sometime after 9 p.m. on April 2nd.
We have a very tight timeline of when the death took place. We have to determine where was Vicki Ross from 9 o'clock in the evening to the early morning hours of April 3rd. Somewhere in that span of 6 or 7 hours, somebody killed her. Our killer has a head start. I never like it when they have a head start.
When 20-year-old Vicki Ross is found murdered in the back seat of her car, the news devastates her friends and family.
Vicki was a very good friend, very easygoing, very well-spoken, beautiful young lady at the time. Got along with most of the people that she had met. There was a dark time with Vicki, unfortunately. A couple years prior to her demise, There was a couple of friends of ours that we were all very close to that had died in a massive car accident. And at that point forward, she had kind of fallen into a point of a little dark space, kind of withdrawn from some people.
And with that darkness came drugs. Friends tell police Vicky was a recovering addict.
They all describe her as a wonderful person who managed to kick the drugs, who is a happy person, who is a hard worker, working 2 jobs to better herself, who has plans for the future.
Well, we did become aware of some of the wrong decisions that she had made, but we were so proud of her because she had worked hard to get out of that.
It looked like there was a turning point there. It looked like you could see it, that things are going to work out for her pretty good, but it didn't work out. She wasn't even 21 when she was murdered.
Vicky's past is now in play. Could she have been mixed up with the wrong crowd?
Following Vicky's death, there was rumors going around the west side of Colorado Springs where we grew up that it may have been an abduction, and it had all been speculation. My feelings on it were that it was the possibility of a bad boyfriend relationship, where that or somebody that she knew that had abducted her.
And it's not long before a new name emerges. Vicky's old boyfriend, Hyun.
They believed that Jan slapped her around on more than one occasion. They disapproved of him. He was her boyfriend during her drug life and has remained her boyfriend after rehab. They couldn't say enough bad things about Jan. That immediately got my attention.
And so he became initially one of our suspects, but at that point we really didn't have any kind of physical evidence to link him to her death.
Investigators bring Hyun in for questioning.
He has an extremely bad attitude. He hates us. He doesn't mind telling us that. He says he has nothing to do with Vicky's death. He says he knows her, he dates her. Sometimes he gets mad at her. Sometimes she won't do what he wants, but he had nothing to do with killing her.
Hyun says he was working all night at a local restaurant on the evening of Vicky's disappearance.
Since there was some unusual sexual activity, such as the shaving of the pubic hairs, that caused us to begin to look into the background of any potential suspects.
But I do ask him one thing. Does Vicky Ross shave her pubic hair? And that's probably the one time he looked like he was giving me an honest answer. And he said, no, she doesn't do that. In fact, she doesn't even shave her legs half the time. And I've asked her to shave her legs, but she doesn't shave her pubic hair. And that came across as very honest.
Hyun says that Vicky had been hanging out with friends from her drug-fueled past, and that any number of them may have been the killer.
Jan provided us with what we expected, a list of first names and nicknames of every idiot that he knew ever been associated with Vicky Ross. There's this guy and that guy, all first names, nobody identified, who believed Vicky owed them $20. In the drug world, these people are so confused because their brain is so fried on this crap. They can't remember who owes them money. They can't remember who took drugs from them, or even if anybody did.
While Hyun is being questioned, other detectives check out his alibi.
We do contact the boss and the 5 co-workers. Jan never left the building. He was in there with all of them, laying tile on the floor. From 8 o'clock the evening of the 2nd until 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning on the 3rd. So as much as I liked Jan has no opportunity to commit this crime. So you suffer the other part of this work, and that's frustration. Jan looks so good, and now can't be him.
Hyun is released from custody, but he has provided a list of names from Vicky's past. Most seem to be immersed in the seedy street life and drug culture of Colorado Springs.
It was not a good sign for me that Vicky was still associating with people that she had associated with when she was into drugs. It's a fatal combination.
Someone once said conspiracies born in hell rarely have angels as witnesses. When you have these individuals as significant witnesses as to events surrounding the time of death, you always have the problem that because of their drug usage, there may be some problem with their perception, their memory, and their motive in telling you what they need to tell you, and also how forthcoming they are. Some people don't want to reveal their own personal problems to detectives.
The investigators involved in this case, we had to spend a lot of time building some trust in her friends to say, if you can be forthright with us, we are not going to look at prosecuting drug charges based on these conversations.
Several of Vicky's friends single out an acquaintance of hers as a possible suspect. A black male in his late 20s or early 30s with short hair. His name is Dave.
Dave has been threatening Vicky to friends. He says that Vicky owes him $10. And if she doesn't pay him, he's going to kill her. It's a new name. It's a new player. Let's see what Dave has to say for himself.
The problem is no one knows where Dave is, and all police have is a vague description. Until a chance call takes the investigation in a new direction.
While we were still interviewing all these characters, the detectives kept calling the phone number found on the piece of paper on Vicky's dashboard. They kept calling and calling. That's what good detectives do.
Finally, they get a break. A woman answers and gives police their first solid lead.
The caller says she's seen Vicky just hours before her murder at the grocery store, and she was with a black male. She said Vicky told her she was going to a party. I get the feeling, just a feeling, that I'm getting closer to my killer.
"10 days after Vicky Ross is found dead in the backseat of her car, detectives finally contact Lisa, the woman whose name and phone number were found on the dashboard of Vicky's car.
She explains she's an old friend of Vicky's, known her a long time. Lisa says that she sees Vicky the night of April 2nd. It's just about closing time at the grocery store. Vicky tells Lisa she's going to a party, and Lisa also says that Vicky leaves the parking lot with a black male.
Lisa doesn't know the man, but his description matches that of Dave, the mysterious person mentioned by Vicky's friends.
We already had information that Vicky was supposed to go to her grandfather's house. But then we learned that she didn't go to her grandfather's house. She went to a party. I'm starting to really like this. Now we're out of the confused drug group memory problem. We have a narrow time frame for her death, and we're starting to eat into it. And now I'm feeling good. We're starting to discover where she was for the time frame and who she was with. And that's going to give us our killer.
Kenda tracks down Dave to his apartment through a phone number provided by Lisa.
Talking to Dave raises a number of red flags. He's the same paranoid, angry guy Hune is. According to the information we had, Dave was the last person with Vicky when she was alive. Could he be the guy? Of course he could. Does he have the personality? Absolutely.
Dave tells investigators that Vicky dropped him off at home before she went to the party.
We speak to the host of the party. She says she knows Vicky, and she knows all of Vicky's friends. She tells us she did have a party on the night that Vicky died, and that Vicky came to that party. We asked her, was she with a black male? She says, no, there were no black males at the party. How long was Vicky here at this party? Oh, they were here for an hour or two, probably. More time away from our time frame. I like that, too. Okay. Did Vicky leave with anybody? Well, yeah, she left with Norman. So tell me about Norman. Well, he's a guy in his 30s, and he has dated Vicky before. So Norman and her leave this party. What time do you think they left? Oh, it was about 10:30 or 11. Now we're down to 5 hours, and she's with Norman. He's with our victim during the time frame of her death.
Norman's full name is Norman Wiegand. A background check reveals a disturbing past.
Norman has an extensive criminal history, and he's been in the penitentiary in Louisiana. His history is unique. It is all sexual assaults on females. Some of them were dismissed. Some of them he was found not guilty. But a couple of them he got tagged for. He did 4 years in the Louisiana State Penitentiary. Now Norman has my undivided attention.
The next step for us was to dig deeper into his background. We spent 8 days in New Orleans investigating his background, contacting 2 ex-wives and some victims of sexual assault cases.
The ex-wife says Norman was crazy when he was on cocaine. He was a totally different guy when he was on coke. Out of control nuts.
The investigators also learn from Norman's ex-wife that he has an unusual fetish.
She said she got very, very worried and frightened of Norman because he demanded to shave her pubic hair. And he did it. She didn't like it. And she said she never wanted him to do that again.
Vicky's murder is a puzzle, but the pieces are starting to fall into place. But before making contact with Norman, detectives question his current girlfriend. Maybe she knows more about Norman's whereabouts night of the murder.
We're talking with her, so what's going on? Were you at the party? No, I wasn't at the party, but I went over to Norman's place the next day, the 3rd, yes. Norman said he had to clean his apartment. And I thought that was really strange. Why did you think that was strange? Well, his place is a dump. He never empties the trash. But all of a sudden, he's all upset and he wants to clean the apartment.
The suspect's girlfriend also told detectives that she had noticed blood on one of Wiegand's sheets. He had also gone down to do laundry that morning, and he explained to her that his dog was in heat, and that was the source of the blood. Again, the fact that he was doing his laundry was something clearly out of character, and that also raised a red flag.
Police suspect that Vicky was killed somewhere other than the cemetery. Could it have been at Norman's apartment?
It makes perfect sense to me that Norman's trying to clean up. I am convinced Norman is my guy. Norman is trying to clean up a crime scene.
In the course of that conversation, she indicated that the evening after that Thursday night that he wasn't there, he did come over, and when they went to bed that night, he undressed down to everything but his T-shirt. And she indicated that his normal practice was to sleep without any clothes on, but this night he kept his T-shirt on. And during the course of the evening, at one point, she did pull up his shirt and did observe a scratch on his midsection.
Vicky Ross was found with broken fingernails. Could she have broken them scratching Norman's back?
I always look for things that mean something to me, that help me make sense of things. And I said, Teresa, I have one more question. Have you ever seen Norman shave? Yes, I've seen Norman shave. How does Norman shave? He uses an electric razor. The coroner said during the autopsy, in his opinion, Vicky's pubic hair was shaved with an electric razor. Now I know Norman uses one. I am very happy at this moment.
Based on what the detectives had developed, we felt there was sufficient evidence to ask a judge to issue a search warrant for Norman Wiegand's apartment.
My instructions are to my people that we're going to conduct a complete and thorough search. I'm hoping we find something that Norman might have overlooked or might have not seen. We start in the bedroom. We think that's our best opportunity. That's where this attack probably took place.
Forensic investigators search the bedroom and immediately turn up something strange.
Detectives found a plastic Ziploc baggie which contained what appeared to be pubic hair. Vicki Ross had been shaved prior to her murder. Luminol was sprayed on some of the walls, which seemed to indicate the presence of blood. Also, interestingly, Norman Weigand had a waterbed. The waterbed was searched, the blankets on top of the waterbed was searched. The waterbed itself was too heavy to move, so the detectives drained the water out of the waterbed.
We lift the mattress back from the liner and immediately see the fingernail. We all believed that belonged to Vicki Ross. We knew of her habit of painting her nails. We knew what was involved with that.
Detectives find a fingernail similar to Vicki Ross's. But there's just one catch.
The only problem was there was nothing at that point to match it to.
The fingernail and hair are both solid evidence, but useless without a match to the victim. Unfortunately, Vicki is now 6 feet under.
Oh, Norman. Looks like you've been a bad boy. It's time we have a talk.
It's been nearly a week since 20-year-old Vicki Ross was found strangled to death. Based on the recent developments, Kenda brings their primary suspect, Norman Weigand, to the station.
We advise him of his rights. He waives his rights. Now, when a convict waives his rights, you know up front he's going to lie his ass off. He's not going to give you anything that you can use, or at least he's going to try not to.
Kenda focuses on the night of Vicki's disappearance.
Norman tells us that he goes to Marilyn's house because he got invited to the party Marilyn was having. While he's there, he meets a number of his friends, and Vicki arrives. He knows Vicki, says he talks to her. They're having a friendly conversation. So he gives you what he thinks is meaningless information that in fact does have meaning. He puts himself with our victim, not the sharpest knife in the drawer, but he believes that he is. Norman's biggest mistake is, in his plan to avoid giving us something useful, he admits he's at Marilyn's house, he admits he's in contact with Vicki, and then he takes the fatal step. He brings Vicki home.
Kenda can now place Norman with the victim close to the time of her murder.
Norman says that Vicki decides to go with Norman to his apartment so they can watch a movie. We let Norman continue. He says, and what happened then, Norman? Well, we left in her car from the party about 10:30, 11 o'clock. Now our time frame is even narrower, and our victim, Vicki, is inside Norman's apartment at 12:30 or 1 o'clock in the morning, with our time of death set between 9 p.m. and 3 a.m. We only have 2 hours left in our time frame. Vicki said she was tired because she worked 2 shifts that day, and she was going to go home, and she left. Did you see her after that, Norman? No. What did you do after Vicki left? I went to bed.
Having that information, we didn't know if what he was telling us was true and she in fact did leave or not, or if in fact that she stayed there and was actually killed there.
I asked him to raise his shirt. He asked me why, and I said, well, I'm looking to see if you have any scratch marks. And he said, I don't have any. And he stood up. Norman raised his shirt, turned slowly. I saw no marks on his chest or his back.
Fingerprint comparisons also fail to implicate Wiegand. Those collected at the crime scene are too smudged to make a positive ID. Despite the lack of evidence, Detective Kenda is convinced he's talking to the right suspect.
I think Norman's a prolific criminal, and I think he killed this girl. You have Norman sitting there smiling at me, telling me that, hey, I didn't do anything. Prove it. Okay, I will. But you don't want to jump the gun. You don't want to get too anxious. There's ample time here. Let's play our cards right. I want to have more in my possession before I arrest him. Because I don't want any possibility of him walking away from this.
Investigators need proof. They have no choice but to release Wiegand from custody.
They knew that he walked out of the detective bureau and went out to wherever he wanted to go. But they also knew that they were starting to build a case on him.
When you are dealing with this type of situation, it certainly can be frustrating when you have to let someone you believe is a killer walk out the front door of your detective bureau. But you know that if you make an arrest at this point before you have the ability to meet that legal standard, that you jeopardize the case.
Norman has no reaction when we let him go. Norman's friendly like he was when he came in. Norman believes that he's made his story work. I believed that Norman had gotten away with crimes in Louisiana, and I wanted to make sure it wouldn't happen in Colorado.
Kenda is buying time to make his case airtight. He asks forensic investigators to make a comparison between the fingernail found in Norman's bed to those of Vicki Ross. He knows this is the critical piece of evidence that will put Norman away for good.
We start pulling photographs of the autopsy. We can't find a clear photograph of Vicki Ross's fingers to determine what nail this could be or which finger it's from. There's lots of pictures of her hands and lots of pictures of her fingers, but nothing that's working in terms of looking at the fingernail we found in Norman's bed. The only way we can be certain that we can match this torn nail to the hands of Vicki Ross, or to look at Vicki Ross's hands. The problem is, Vicki Ross has been buried for over a week. We have to take a different step, and it's one we don't like to take, and one we often try to avoid. We need to exhume Vicki's body.
Doing what it takes is what drives a successful murder investigation, and we knew that exhuming the body, one, would be a sensitive issue, and that we only wanted to do it if we had the support of the family. We are human too, and we have the same emotions, and this isn't something that's done every day. And so it was, I guess I would use the word sort of bizarre to go through those steps.
It's like having your heart torn out. It's like, poor Vicki. I mean, it's like she was being violated again, but it had to be done. We had to get this guy. They had to exhume Vicki to match that torn fingernail to her. And so, of course, permission had to be given, and they had to go through all the legalities of opening the grave. And that was a very difficult thing to go through. But it did the job that it needed to be done.
The stakes in this business are very high, whether they're stated or not. One mistake, one way or another, one lack of attention to something can result in a killer going free, a family being emotionally destroyed, all from just you. It is the ultimate form of high-stakes poker. So we get his workers to open Vicki's grave and bring the casket above ground.
The coroner opens Vicki's coffin. He removes all 10 fingernails, placing each one in a separate container. When he is done, the coroner closes the coffin and reburies Vicki Ross.
The whole time this process is going on, I'm thinking, I sure hope I'm right. I sure hope this is Vicki's fingernail. I know the fate of this investigation rides on this one moment.
It's been just over a week since murder victim Vicki Ross was laid to rest in a local cemetery. Investigators have searched the apartment of ex-convict Norman Wiegand and collected a fractured fingernail from underneath his bed. But in order to charge him with the murder, Detective Kenda must wait for a comparison to be made with those collected from the victim's body during her exhumation. That could take days.
The detectives decided to go back in their investigation. The one piece of evidence they had that tied someone to the crime was that blanket. Because the victim had been found wrapped in a brown blanket, it was important to find out where this brown blanket came from.
One of the pieces of evidence on the blanket was some sort of animal hair. It could have been dog hair. And they knew that the suspect, Norman Wiegand, had a dog. And so they went back to check that out, but it turned out that the hair from his dog did not match the hair on the blanket.
Detectives question Wiegand's neighbors, and one's about to reveal a twisted coincidence.
Mrs. Johnson explains that her and Norman share a common storage area. Mrs. Johnson puts her seasonal items in storage. What do you keep in the storage area? Well, these apartments are small, Mrs. Johnson says. So for seasonal items that she's not going to use during the summer, for example, my electric blanket. The detective immediately keyed on the electric blanket.
Vicki Ross's body was found wrapped up in an electric blanket.
Mrs. Johnson, can you describe this blanket? Mrs. Johnson says, yes, it is brown, and I still have the control unit for it here in the apartment.
She went to a storage area and took detectives with her that she shared in a common area that Norman Wiegand had access to. Her blanket was missing.
For Lieutenant Kenda, everything is starting to come into focus. He recalls that animal hair was collected from the blanket found at the crime scene.
So he asked Mrs. Johnson, do you have a dog? No, I don't have a dog, but I have a cat. Really? And the detective says he'd like to take some hair samples from Muffin, and he will try to do so as painlessly as possible. They get a brush, and they brush some hair out of Muffin. Muffin's not too pleased about this process, but my man is doing his job.
Back at the lab, the serial number on Mrs. Johnson's control unit is compared to the label on the electric blanket collected at the crime scene.
Same manufacturer, matching number. Mrs. Johnson's absolutely correct. That's her blanket. Taken from the common storage area where Norman has access to it. And the last time she saw that blanket, it was in a box. And the last time I saw it, it was wrapped around Vicki Ross.
Forensic investigators compare the hair samples from the cat to those found on the blanket. Again, it's a perfect match. The final nail in Norman Wiegand's coffin comes with the forensic results based on the exhumation.
The lab did make the determination that the striations of the tear matched up, as well as there were 2 layers of fingernail polish that also matched up from each piece, confirming that they were in fact Vicki Ross's.
That is a key piece of lockdown evidence. Part of our victim is still in Norman's bed. Crucial stuff. So now Norman's attitude that we are idiots and we don't know what we're doing, well, we know one thing to do. I can put Vicki Ross in your bed on the night she died.
Lieutenant Kenda is convinced that Vicki went home with Norman after the party.
But sometime during the night, he turned on her. Vicki broke her fingernails trying to defend herself. and Norman strangled her to death. Now Norman has to dispose of her and her car. He takes a blanket from a neighbor's storage locker, wraps Vicky's body in it, puts it in the back seat of her own car, and drives her 2.5 blocks to the cemetery where he abandons the car on the grounds. And he walks home.
With the evidence now directly linking him to Vicky's murder, the police arrest Norman Wiegand and charge him with first-degree murder. Facing life in prison without parole, Wiegand pleads guilty and is sentenced to 46 years in prison.
She's, a vicious criminal who shouldn't even be breathing right now. It just makes me crazy every time I think about it.
After serving only 16 years in prison, Norman Wiegand became eligible for parole. It's possible he could be released from prison as soon as November 2014.
That would really drive me nuts, to knowing that it could happen. It could be reach a point here where we just can't do anything to keep him in any longer.
The sad part of this whole thing is that here was Vicki Ross, the young, beautiful woman trying to get her life turned around. She was on the right path when she crosses paths with somebody like Norman Wiegand.
The things that he did to Vicki can never be undone. But hopefully, they will keep him in prison. They'll keep him locked up like the vicious animal that he is. In fact, I hesitate to call him an animal because animals do what they do because that's their instinct.
Vicki Ross was a beautiful young girl. She had problems in her life, yes, but she was correcting them. She was starting over. She was starting a new life. And it was taken from her by Norman Wiegand. It's my job to find the Norman Wiegands of the world. But it's more than that to me.
At 3:17 a.m., the phone rang inside a quiet ranch-style home in Fairfield County, Ohio, and by sunrise the entire town would be holding its breath. The call lasted 11 seconds. No words. Just air. Faint, uneven breathing. Then a click. By noon, 28-year-old Melissa Avery was gone. The front door of her house stood half open when her sister arrived that morning, groceries still sweating inside plastic bags on the passenger seat. The television was on. The coffee maker hissed on an empty pot. Melissa's purse lay on the kitchen counter. Her keys were beside it. Her car was in the driveway. Nothing smashed. Nothing overturned. Just absence. A clean, surgical vanishing that made seasoned deputies shift uneasily on their feet. This was March 2000. A town of church potlucks, Friday night basketball, unlocked doors. Violent crime belonged somewhere else, Columbus, Cleveland, the headlines on page 6. Not here. Deputies walked the perimeter first. Muddy patches behind the house. Early spring thaw. One partial shoe impression near the tree line, too blurred to cast. A cigarette, but pressed into wet soil. Melissa didn't smoke. None of her friends did. The brand was common. Cheap. The kind you could buy at any gas station along Route 33. Inside, investigators noted small things. A single wine glass in the sink. A second glass on the coffee table. Lipstick on one rim. None on the other. The couch cushions slightly compressed, as if someone had leaned forward quickly. On the answering machine, the 3:17 a.m. call, breathing, faint static, then silence. No sign of forced entry. No struggle visible. No blood. By evening the phrase began circulating quietly between cruisers and radios. Suspicious disappearance. Melissa worked as a dental assistant. Reliable. Punctual. The kind of person who returned shopping carts and remembered birthdays. She had ended a relationship 6 months earlier with a man named Eric Dalton, a mechanic known for a short temper and longer grudges. Detectives found him by dusk. He was at work. Grease on his hands. Surprise in his eyes. He admitted they'd argued when she left him, but insisted he hadn't seen her in weeks. He agreed to a polygraph. He passed. Not perfectly, but enough. The community gathered at the Avery home that night, casseroles lining the counters, whispers filling hallways. Volunteers organized search grids. Fields were combed. Ditches probed with sticks. Dogs brought in from 2 counties overcaught Melissa's scent at her back porch, then lost it abruptly near the gravel driveway. As if she had stepped into a vehicle. Abduction. The word hit like a hammer. Detectives canvassed neighbors. One elderly man, across the street, reported hearing a car door slam around 3:20 a.m. Another neighbor claimed she saw headlights moving slowly, without beams, near the Avery house shortly after 3. No one wrote down a plate. No one saw a face. The case escalated within 48 hours. State investigators joined. Flyers spread across Ohio. Melissa's photograph, brown hair, steady smile, taped to storefront windows and gas pumps. A $10,000 reward offered by her family. Then, 4 days in, the first strange detail surfaced. A truck driver traveling east on Interstate 70 reported seeing a woman matching Melissa's description at a rest stop outside Zanesville the morning she vanished. She appeared distressed, he said, arguing with a man near a dark pickup. The trucker remembered the pickup because of a cracked left tail light taped with red plastic. He remembered the man because of a tattoo curling above his collar, something black, maybe tribal. Investigators scoured traffic cameras. In 2000, footage was grainy, inconsistent. One camera captured a dark vehicle exiting the rest stop around 6:12 a.m. The resolution was too poor to read plates. The left rear light did appear dimmer than the right. It could have been glare. It could have been nothing. The truck driver worked long hauls. His timeline blurred under questioning. Fatigue. Memory gaps. Still, the detail about the tail light stuck. Weeks passed. No body. No ransom call. No credit card activity. Melissa's bank account untouched. Her cell phone, an early model flip phone, never pinged again after 3:18 a.m. Detectives dug into her life with surgical precision. Financial records. Emails. Phone logs. Nothing secretive. Nothing reckless. Just routines. Work. Church. A small circle of friends. A recently planned weekend trip to visit cousins in Dayton. The ex-boyfriend remained under scrutiny. Eric Dalton owned a dark blue Ford pickup. Left tail light intact. No tape. No visible cracks. Detectives photographed it from every angle. Forensic techs vacuumed fibers from the seats. Nothing conclusive. No hair. No blood. No trace linking him to Melissa's home that night. By summer the searches slowed. The casseroles stopped coming. Media vans left town. The Avery family refused to move Melissa's belongings. Her room remained untouched. Her voicemail greeting preserved. Autumn brought colder air and colder leads. Then, in November, a hunter discovered a shallow depression in a wooded stretch 30 miles south of Fairfield County. Animal disturbance. Torn soil. Authorities descended. 4 hours they dug. What emerged was not Melissa, but the remains of a different missing woman from 2 years prior. Unrelated. Brutalized. Forgotten. The discovery ignited fear. Was there a predator moving through rural Ohio? A pattern hiding in plain sight? Investigators compared files. Similarities were thin. Geography overlapped loosely. Methods unclear. But unease thickened. Melissa's case file grew heavier. Interviews stacked. Tips logged. More than 300 by the first anniversary. Sightings in Indiana, Kentucky, West Virginia. All unconfirmed. All dissolving under scrutiny. The 3:17 a.m. call was enhanced by audio specialists. Beneath the breathing, faint mechanical noise surfaced, rhythmic, metallic. Possibly a turn signal. Possibly a clock. Possibly nothing more than tape distortion. Experts disagreed. The ambiguity gnawed at everyone. In early 2002, a new detective inherited the file, Daniel Hargrove. Younger. Methodical. Known for patience. He rewalked the Avery property alone one gray afternoon, standing at the back porch, where the dogs had lost her scent. He stared at the gravel, imagining tires crunching softly, a door opening, a hand reaching. He requested the cigarette, but retested with improved DNA methods available at the time. The sample yielded partial genetic material, male, insufficient for CODIS entry. Not enough markers. Frustratingly incomplete. Years layered themselves over the case. Technology evolved. Names faded from memory. But every March, Melissa's mother held a vigil in the church parking lot. Candles flickered against Ohio wind. Local news ran brief segments, cold case remains unsolved. In 2008, a construction crew widening a county road unearthed a scrap of fabric tangled in brush along an old drainage culvert. Blue cotton. Weathered. Detectives compared it to clothing Melissa owned. Inconclusive. The fibers were too degraded. The location sat 5 miles from her home. Close enough to matter. Far enough to question. Rumors metastasized. A traveling contractor. A drifter. A truck stop regular. Each theory flared, then dimmed. Eric Dalton moved out of state in 2010. Married. Divorced. Minor arrests for disorderly conduct. Nothing violent. He continued to deny involvement, occasionally calling detectives to ask if there were updates, as if he too wanted the ghost quieted. Behind closed doors, investigators admitted what they would not say publicly: without a body, without definitive DNA, without a witness willing to stand firm, the case was freezing. Then, in 2015, a development cracked the stillness. Advancements in genetic genealogy began solving cases once thought impossible. Hargrove, now older, requested the cigarette, but be re-examined under newer extraction techniques. The lab warned expectations should remain low. The sample was degraded, mixed with environmental contaminants. But technology had sharpened since 2002. Weeks turned into months. Finally, a call came from the state lab. They had isolated a stronger partial profile. Not complete, but stronger. It still could not enter CODIS conventionally. However, it might be viable for genealogical comparison if enough markers aligned. The decision to proceed required funding, approval, and patience. The Avery family agreed instantly. As analysts built tentative family trees from the partial DNA, a distant cluster surfaced, relatives concentrated in central Ohio. Among them, a man named Thomas Kessler. 42 in 2000. Owner of a dark green Chevy pickup registered that spring with a repair noted on the left rear taillight, after a minor collision. Kessler had lived 12 miles from Melissa. No prior violent felonies. A record of DUIs. Known to frequent the same convenience store brand that sold the cigarette type found behind Melissa's house. Detectives felt the temperature in the room change. Kessler had died in 2013 of a heart attack. No arrest possible. No interrogation. Only questions. Investigators exhumed nothing. There was no legal basis yet. They quietly interviewed surviving relatives, under the pretense of reviewing old records. One cousin mentioned Kessler had abruptly sold his pickup in mid-2000. Cash sale. No paperwork trail beyond a handwritten receipt long discarded. Another relative recalled a tattoo he once had above his collarbone, black ink, tribal pattern curling toward his neck. Removed later, poorly, leaving a scar. The truck driver from Interstate 70 had described a tattoo. But memory erodes. And coincidence masquerades as certainty. Detectives located the man who purchased Kessler's old pickup. The vehicle had since been scrapped. Crushed. Melted down years earlier. Ground-penetrating radar was used on property Kessler once rented in 2000. Nothing conclusive. Soil disturbances consistent with landscaping. No remains recovered. The partial DNA, though promising, could not definitively place Kessler at Melissa's home. It suggested relation, not guilt. And so the breakthrough stalled at the edge of resolution, suspended between suspicion and proof. Melissa Avery remains missing. Her bedroom still holds folded sweaters that smell faintly of cedar and thyme. Her mother's hair has gone white under the weight of unanswered questions. In Fairfield County, people still remember the morning the phone rang and the breathing filled the line. Some nights, when wind moves across gravel driveways, residents recall the image of headlights gliding without beams, a door opening softly, a life interrupted in the space between seconds. The file is no longer cold. But it is not closed. And somewhere in Ohio soil, or memory, the truth waits, silent, refusing to surface. The problem with partial DNA is that it whispers instead of shouts. Inside the Fairfield County Sheriff's Office, the Kessler lead sat on the conference table like an unexploded device, dangerous, fragile, impossible to ignore. Detectives circled it carefully. The genealogical analysis suggested that the male DNA lifted from the cigarette, but behind Melissa Avery's house, belonged to someone closely related to Thomas Kessler. A brother. A cousin. Possibly Kessler himself. But the sample was incomplete, degraded by moisture and time. It could imply presence. It could imply transfer. It could imply nothing at all. Still, for the first time in 15 years, the case had a pulse. Daniel Hargrove studied Kessler's life in slow motion. Born 1958. Raised in Lancaster. Divorced once. Worked seasonal construction. Known to drink heavily. Neighbors described him as quiet until he wasn't, then volatile, prone to shouting matches that echoed across yards. He lived alone in a rented farmhouse in early 2000, 12 miles from Melissa's neighborhood. No known connection to her. No shared workplace. No church overlap. No documented phone calls between them. Which made it worse. Random predators leave fewer footprints. Investigators reconstructed Kessler's schedule from old employment logs. In March 2000, he was between jobs. Unemployed for 3 weeks. Plenty of time. Too much time. Gas receipts were long gone. Credit card records unavailable. His 2000 tax return revealed nothing but modest income and scattered deductions. The dark green Chevy pickup became an obsession. DMV archives confirmed it had been registered in February 2000 and reported with minor rear light damage after a parking lot incident in late March, 2 days after Melissa vanished. No police report filed. Just a repair note attached to an insurance inquiry that was never completed. Left rear taillight. Detectives tracked down the body shop listed on the old insurance form. The business had changed ownership twice. Paper records from 2000 had been destroyed in a flood years earlier. No invoices survived. No mechanic remembered the truck. The truck driver, who claimed to see Melissa arguing at the Zanesville rest stop, was re-interviewed in 2016. He was older now. Slower in his recollections. He stood by his statement, but admitted uncertainty about the exact color of the pickup. Dark, he repeated. Maybe green. Maybe blue. I remember the tape on the light. And the tattoo. That's what stuck. Memory sharpens around trauma and blurs around detail. Investigators knew that. But they also knew coincidences stack like bricks until they resemble a wall. The genealogical team pushed further. They mapped Kessler's extended family. Brothers in Pickerington. A cousin in Newark. One nephew with a minor criminal record. Detectives obtained voluntary DNA samples from 2 relatives, under the explanation of clarifying family tree data. The comparison tightened the probability, the cigarette, but DNA likely came from a male within 1 generational step of those tested. Kessler had no sons, which narrowed the circle. But probability is not proof. Hargrove requested permission to exhume Kessler's body. Prosecutors hesitated. The legal threshold required stronger cause. Publicly naming a deceased man, without definitive evidence, risked defamation claims from surviving relatives. Privately, investigators felt the weight of expectation pressing against thin ice. Then a new detail surfaced from an unlikely source. In 2001, a woman in neighboring Perry County had filed a police report alleging she was followed late at night by a dark pickup with a damaged rear light. The driver, she said, slowed beside her car repeatedly, attempting to get her to pull over. She escaped by turning abruptly into a lit gas station. The report had gone nowhere. No plate number captured. No suspect identified. The woman's description of the driver, white male, late 30s to early 40s, short hair, visible dark ink near the collarbone. Kessler would have been 42. Detectives reopened the Perry County file. The reporting officer, now retired, recalled the incident vaguely. Creepy guy, he said. But we had nothing to go on. The pattern thickened. Hargrove drove to the farmhouse Kessler had rented in 2000. The property had changed hands twice. The current owner allowed a limited search of outbuildings and surrounding acreage. Ground-penetrating radar again scanned soil. Several anomalies appeared, rectangular disturbances consistent with old landscaping trenches. Excavation revealed nothing but scrap metal and animal bones. Frustration mounted. Meanwhile, the Avery family lived in suspended time. Melissa's mother attended every meeting, every briefing, gripping a leather folder filled with clippings and notes. If he did it, she asked once, voice barely steady, why her? No one could answer. In late 2017, a retired co-worker of Kessler came forward after seeing a local news segment about the renewed investigation. He claimed that sometime in spring 2000, Kessler had arrived at a job site agitated, complaining about the woman who wouldn't shut up. According to the co-worker, Kessler had said, "Sometimes you gotta make them disappear." The comment was brushed off at the time as drunken bravado. The co-worker admitted he could not recall the exact date. Memory again, elastic, unreliable. Detectives documented the statement. It added texture, not substance. The partial DNA was sent to a private lab specializing in degraded samples. Analysts attempted advanced sequencing to recover additional markers. Weeks stretched into months. When results returned, they confirmed the earlier conclusion: strong likelihood the contributor was Thomas Kessler, or a very close male relative. Still not enough for exhumation. Pressure built internally. Younger detectives argued the circumstantial weight justified digging deeper, literally. Prosecutors demanded cleaner lines. The case hovered between momentum and collapse. Then, in early 2018, an unexpected twist jolted the file. A hiker exploring a wooded ravine 15 miles from Melissa's home discovered a rusted pendant tangled in roots near a creek bed. The pendant bore a small engraved initial, M. Local news ran the find cautiously. The Avery family identified it as similar to one Melissa had worn, gifted by her grandmother. Photographs from 1999 showed her wearing a nearly identical piece. Forensic examination revealed the pendant had been exposed to elements for years. Soil samples suggested it had likely been there since early 2000s, possibly longer. No remains were found nearby despite extensive grid searches. The location of the ravine fell within a radius between Melissa's home and the farmhouse Kessler rented. The map on Hargrove's office wall gained another pin. Cadaver dogs were deployed again, combing deeper into the wooded expanse. One dog alerted briefly near a cluster of sycamores before losing interest. Excavation yielded nothing definitive, just disturbed soil and animal remains. The land held secrets stubbornly. By 2019, media attention reignited. Headlines resurfaced: Ohio 2000 cold case breakthrough. Talk radio debated the ethics of naming a deceased suspect without charges. Online forums dissected every rumor, every photograph of Kessler's faded tattoo. His surviving sister publicly defended him. Tom was rough, she said, but he wasn't a killer. The Avery family remained silent in response. Behind the scenes, detectives pursued one final avenue: touch DNA testing on items preserved from Melissa's home. The wine glass on the coffee table. The couch cushions. Evidence storage conditions from 2000 were less than ideal. But technology had advanced. Testing the wine glass yielded a mixed profile, Melissa's DNA prominent. A faint male contributor present, but too degraded for conclusive comparison. It did not match the partial cigarette profile with certainty. It did not exclude it either. Ambiguity again. Time pressed on. Investigators considered the possibility that Kessler was not the source of the cigarette, but a relative who had visited the property for unrelated reasons. Yet no record placed any Kessler family member near Melissa's home. No neighbors recalled seeing him. No documented interaction connected their lives. Unless the connection was fleeting. A chance encounter at a gas station. A passing glance. A predator selecting at random. In 2020, exactly 20 years after Melissa vanished, Fairfield County held another vigil. Candles flickered in careful rows. The sheriff spoke carefully about renewed efforts and advancing science. The phrase, active investigation, carried both hope and exhaustion. Hargrove stood at the back of the crowd, watching Melissa's mother hold the pendant recovered from the ravine. The engraved M caught candlelight like a signal. The case was no longer silent. It was breathing again, faint, uneven, like the 11-second call that started it all. But breathing is not confession. And as the investigation edged closer to a name that could not answer questions, the central truth remained buried somewhere between suspicion and certainty, between a taped taillight and a patch of Ohio woods that refused to yield what it was hiding. The breakthrough everyone feared came not with a body, but with a map. In early 2021, a young analyst assigned to the cold case unit began digitizing decades of paper reports into a geographic profiling system the department had only recently acquired. Every sighting, every tip, every recovered object, every address linked to Thomas Kessler between 1995 and 2005. The screen filled with colored pins, red for evidence, blue for witness statements, yellow for unverified tips. At first, it looked like noise. Random scatter across central Ohio. But when the system overlaid time stamps and movement patterns, something shifted. A corridor emerged. Melissa's home. The Zanesville rest stop sighting. The ravine where the pendant was found. The farmhouse Kessler rented. The Perry County stalking report. They aligned along a loose, but chilling arc following Route 22 and its feeder roads Kessler would have driven regularly between job sites and bars he frequented. It wasn't proof. It was geometry. Hargrove stared at the glowing line on the screen long after the room emptied. Predators hunt within comfort zones. They circle familiar territory. The arc suggested routine. Opportunity. Escape routes known by memory, not map. Investigators revisited Kessler's known associates from 2000. Most had aged into quiet lives. Some refused to talk. One, a former drinking companion named Ray Mercer, agreed to meet at a diner off Route 33. He stirred his coffee for a long time before speaking. Tom changed around that spring, Mercer said. Got jumpy. Sold the truck fast. Started talking about moving south. Did he ever mention a woman? Hargrove asked. Mercer hesitated. He said he messed up bad. I thought it was money. Or a fight. Did he say what he meant? No. Just that he couldn't fix it. The words landed heavy. Mercer also recalled helping Kessler burn items in a metal barrel behind the farmhouse one night in April 2000. Old clothes, I think. Maybe seat covers. I didn't ask. Seat covers. Detectives returned to the farmhouse property with renewed urgency. Though the land had yielded nothing before, they focused on the exact area Mercer described. Soil samples were taken from beneath where the burn barrel once stood. Laboratory analysis detected trace hydrocarbons consistent with fabric combustion. No identifiable biological material survived. Fire destroys stories. Meanwhile, genealogical scientists pushed the cigarette DNA further, comparing it against expanding public databases, as more individuals submitted samples over the years. In mid-2021, the probability calculation tightened again. The contributor was almost certainly Thomas Kessler. Statistically overwhelming. Not courtroom absolute, but suffocatingly close. Prosecutors reconsidered exhumation. Kessler's surviving sister filed a formal objection, citing religious grounds and harassment. The legal battle threatened to drag on for months. The Avery family, exhausted but resolute, supported the petition quietly, attending hearings without speaking to cameras. In September 2021, a judge granted limited approval for exhumation based on cumulative evidence. The order was narrow, precise. The grave would be opened. DNA collected. The process discreet. The morning of the exhumation dawned gray and windless. Only essential personnel were present. No media. No public announcement. The cemetery grass bent under boot prints as the grave was opened for the first time in 8 years. Forensic technicians worked methodically. Samples were collected from preserved bone. The casket resealed. The earth replaced. Then came the waiting. Weeks passed, Autumn deepened. Leaves fell across Fairfield County like quiet applause. The lab results arrived on a Tuesday afternoon. The DNA extracted from Thomas Kessler's remains matched the partial profile from the cigarette, but to a degree that erased reasonable doubt. Statistical probability exceeded 1 in several trillion. The man who smoked that cigarette behind Melissa Avery's house in March 2000 was Thomas Kessler. The room went silent. Presence established. But presence alone does not equal murder. Defense attorneys would argue secondary transfer. Coincidence. An innocent visit. The prosecution would need more: motive, connection, remains. Still, for the first time in 21 years, investigators could say with scientific certainty that Kessler had been at Melissa's home. Why? That question detonated across the case file. Detectives re-examined phone records with modern analytical software. Though Melissa's cell phone had stopped transmitting at 3:18 a.m., landline data from her home revealed an outgoing call placed at 2:57 a.m., 3 rings, disconnected. The number dialed belonged to a convenience store along Route 22, a store where Kessler was a frequent customer. Was it a misdial? A call for help interrupted. The store had closed at midnight. No answer would have come. The timeline tightened. At 3:17 a.m., the breathing call came in. At 3:20 a.m., neighbors heard a car door. At 6:12 a.m., a dark pickup exited the Zanesville rest stop. Investigators theorized Kessler may have known Melissa's routine. Perhaps he had seen her before, at a gas station, a grocery store. Perhaps he followed her home days earlier, memorizing the layout. The cigarette suggested surveillance. Waiting in the tree line. Watching lights go dark. But another possibility emerged, more intimate, more dangerous. In late 2021, a retired waitress from a bar in Lancaster contacted authorities after recognizing Kessler's name in renewed news coverage. She claimed that in early 2000, she had seen Kessler arguing with a young woman matching Melissa's description in the parking lot. She told him to leave her alone, the waitress said. He grabbed her arm. She pulled away. The waitress admitted she never reported it. She assumed it was a couple's fight. Detectives showed her photographs from 2000. She pointed to Melissa without hesitation. If true, it meant Kessler had approached Melissa before the night she vanished. The randomness dissolved. Investigators searched bar credit card receipts and employment logs from that period. Records were incomplete, but one entry placed Melissa's debit card at the bar's ATM 2 weeks before her disappearance. Had she encountered him there? Had he fixated? The psychological profile sharpened. A volatile man, unemployed, drinking heavily, rejected publicly. A woman who resisted. Rejection can metastasize into obsession. The final push came from soil analysis. Advanced forensic botany compared microscopic plant material found embedded in the recovered pendant to samples collected from Kessler's former farmhouse property. Pollen grains unique to a cluster of wild phlox growing near the ravine matched specimens documented in old photographs of the farmhouse yard taken during a 2001 property listing. It suggested the pendant had contact with that soil before ending up in the ravine. Transfer. Movement. A body transported, perhaps temporarily stored. Excavation resumed at the farmhouse, with renewed intensity, in early 2022. This time, investigators focused not on open fields, but beneath a concrete slab poured behind the barn in late spring 2000 according to county permit records. The slab measured 8 by 10 feet. Recently poured that year. Purpose listed as equipment storage. Ground-penetrating radar indicated an anomaly beneath one quadrant, void space inconsistent with natural settling. Concrete cutters arrived at dawn. As the blade bit into the slab, the sound echoed across frost-hardened ground like a warning. Dust rose. Sections were removed carefully. Beneath the concrete lay disturbed earth darker than surrounding soil. Excavation tools replaced heavy machinery. 3 feet down, a fragment of fabric emerged, blue cotton, degraded but unmistakably human-made. Another inch. Bone. The dig slowed to reverence. Within hours, partial skeletal remains were exposed, arranged in a shallow grave beneath the slab. Dental records would later confirm what everyone already knew in their bones. Melissa Avery had been there all along. Hidden beneath concrete. Beneath years. Beneath silence. The discovery detonated through Ohio like a shockwave. Headlines screamed, Ohio 2000 cold case breakthrough, remains found. News helicopters hovered over farmland once anonymous. For the Avery family, grief reopened fresh as the day she vanished. Closure arrived tangled with horror. For investigators, vindication mixed with unfinished business. Thomas Kessler had been present at her home. He had likely followed her. He had likely transported her. And now, under concrete he poured himself, lay the proof of concealment. But one question refused to die. What happened between 3:17 a.m. and the moment she was placed beneath that slab? The autopsy would speak softly. The soil would whisper. And the final chapters of a 22-year silence were only beginning to surface. When the concrete came up, the air changed. Not just at the farmhouse. Everywhere. For 22 years Melissa Avery had existed as a question mark. A photograph on flyers, a candle in March wind, a voicemail greeting that refused to age. Now she was evidence. Bone fragments laid carefully into white trays. Blue cotton fibers clinging to soil. A shallow grave hidden beneath 8 inches of poured certainty. The autopsy began in clinical silence. The remains were partial, but remarkably preserved given the conditions. The concrete had sealed the grave from moisture, from animals, from erosion. It had also sealed the truth in place, waiting. The forensic pathologist noted perimortem trauma to the skull. A depressed fracture, along the right parietal bone. Blunt force. Not accidental. Not consistent with a simple fall. Defensive fractures on 2 fingers. She had fought. No clear ligature marks remained on the cervical vertebrae, but microfractures suggested possible strangulation. The medical examiner stopped short of declaring exact cause of death, listing it as homicide by undetermined means, blunt force trauma contributing. There were no signs of dismemberment. No evidence of post-mortem burning. Whoever placed her there wanted her hidden intact, not destroyed. Buried quickly. Efficiently. Soil layering indicated the grave had been dug and filled within a short time frame, no natural settling between layers. The concrete slab above it was poured within days of the burial, sealing the disturbed earth permanently. The permit for that slab had been filed March 28, 2000. Melissa vanished March 14. 14 days. 2 weeks between disappearance and concrete. The timeline constricted like a fist. Investigators reconstructed those 14 days through Kessler's surviving paper trail. Hardware store receipt for cement bags, dated March 26. Rental of a concrete mixer logged March 27 under his name. A neighbor from that period, now elderly, remembered hearing machinery late one night that spring. Thought he was fixing something, she said. Didn't think twice. No one did. The farmhouse, once just another rural rental, now felt predatory in hindsight, isolated, shielded by trees, out of sight from passing cars. A perfect place to hold someone without witnesses. Forensic anthropologists examined bone positioning inside the grave. The body had been placed on its side, knees slightly drawn. Not arranged ceremonially. Not dumped carelessly. Positioned deliberately to fit the narrow excavation. There were no personal belongings found in the grave, beyond fragments of clothing matching what Melissa had last been seen wearing. The pendant had been removed, which meant it had likely fallen off during transport, or initial burial, later relocated by environmental shift, or by Kessler himself. The cigarette behind her house now read differently, not surveillance alone, but prelude. Detectives pieced together a likely sequence. Kessler, unemployed and drinking, fixates on Melissa after a public rejection at the Lancaster bar. He learns her neighborhood. Waits in darkness. Smokes. Watches lights extinguish. Approaches in early morning hours, perhaps under the pretense of apology or persistence. She refuses entry. He forces it. No sign of struggle inside the house suggested control was immediate. A weapon displayed, a threat whispered. The wine glass on the table hinted she may not have been alone earlier in the evening, but no confirmed visitor emerged from re-examination of phone logs. Perhaps the second glass was older. Perhaps it meant nothing. At 2:57 a.m., an outgoing call from her landline to a closed convenience store. A misdial under stress. A desperate attempt to reach anyone. Interrupted. At 3:17 a.m., the breathing call. Possibly Kessler redialing her last number accidentally. Possibly Melissa triggering redial while restrained. 11 seconds of oxygen and fear. By 3:20 a.m., neighbors hear a car door. She leaves the house alive. The rest stop sighting at 6:12 a.m. becomes critical. If accurate, she was alive hours after abduction. Arguing. Resisting. Visible. Which means she survived the initial assault. But survival in captivity is not safety. Detectives found no evidence that Kessler owned restraints, but absence of record is not absence of action. The farmhouse interior had been remodeled years later, forensic opportunities lost. Investigators searched old landfill records, considering whether bedding or other materials might have been discarded in March 2000. The landfill had long since been compacted beyond practical excavation. The concrete slab site yielded one more detail. Embedded within the underside of the slab, pressed into drying cement, was a faint impression, tread pattern from a work boot. The pattern matched a brand Kessler had purchased in 1999 based on an archived store loyalty record. Not unique, but consistent. Every piece aligned. In a press conference held weeks after the remains were identified, the sheriff spoke carefully. Based on the totality of forensic evidence, we believe Thomas Kessler is responsible for the abduction and murder of Melissa Avery. The word murder echoed across microphones. Kessler's sister wept publicly, insisting her brother was being tried in death. But the science was no longer whispering. It was clear. Yet even with a name attached, the story refused to rest. Investigators reopened unsolved missing persons cases along the Route 22 corridor from 1995 to 2005. 3 cases bore loose similarities: women last seen near highways, bodies recovered months later in wooded areas. None connected directly to Kessler before. Now, proximity demanded re-examination. DNA comparisons were ordered where possible. In 2 cases, evidence had degraded beyond recovery. In one, partial samples remained under review. The possibility that Melissa was not the only one hung in the air like smoke. Meanwhile, the Avery family prepared for a burial that should have happened 2 decades earlier. The church filled beyond capacity. White flowers lined the aisle. Melissa's photograph, frozen at 28, rested atop a closed casket. Her mother touched the wood as if testing reality. Outside, reporters spoke in hushed tones about closure, about justice delayed. But closure is a word for headlines. Inside that sanctuary, grief felt raw and immediate, as if March 14, 2000 had happened yesterday. Detective Hargrove attended quietly in the back pew. He had spent half his career with Melissa's file open on his desk. Now it would be marked cleared by exception, suspect deceased. No trial. No confession. No cross-examination of motive. Only evidence. After the service, Hargrove returned alone to the farmhouse property. The slab had been removed entirely now, the grave excavated and refilled properly. The earth looked ordinary again. He stood where the concrete once lay and imagined the night it was poured. Wet cement smoothing over disturbance. The sound of a trowel. The deliberate act of sealing a secret. 14 days. What happened inside those 14 days remains partially obscured. Did she plead? Did she negotiate? Did she believe she would go home? The autopsy could not answer duration of captivity with precision. Soil temperature and preservation complicated insect activity analysis. But subtle indicators suggested she may not have been buried immediately upon death, slight decomposition patterns inconsistent with immediate interment. Which implies time. Time in that farmhouse. Time unaccounted for. Investigators continue to comb through Kessler's history, looking for digital ghosts, overlooked witnesses, fragments of corroboration. Because even when a body is found and a suspect identified, the narrative demands completion. Melissa's case is no longer a cold question mark. It is a solved equation with missing variables. And along Route 22, drivers still pass stretches of woods without knowing what lay hidden beneath concrete for 22 silent years, a life interrupted, a predator concealed, a truth that refused to stay buried forever. The word, solved, settled over Fairfield County like a headline carved in stone, but inside the sheriff's office, no one felt finished. Because when a body is found under concrete after 22 years, you don't just close a file. You open 10 more. The discovery beneath Kessler's slab triggered a full forensic sweep of every property he had lived on between 1990 and 2013. Storage units. Temporary rentals. A trailer he occupied briefly outside Newark. Each address became a potential grave site, in the eyes of investigators, who had learned the hard way what silence can hide. Cadaver dogs moved across yards that had once seemed ordinary. Most yielded nothing. One alerted faintly near an old shed foundation, behind the Newark trailer lot. Excavation revealed animal remains and rusted farm equipment. False hope. Again. Still, something about Kessler's timeline refused to sit cleanly. Melissa disappeared March 14, 2000. The slab permit was filed March 28. The concrete was poured the following day. Receipts showed cement purchase on the 26th. But phone records, newly reanalyzed with modern software, revealed something investigators had missed years earlier. On March 16, 2 days after Melissa vanished, Kessler placed a call from a payphone in Zanesville at 9:42 p.m. The number dialed belonged to a classified ad listing in the local newspaper. The ad was for a used chest freezer. Detectives tracked down the seller, now living in Kentucky. He confirmed selling a large chest freezer to a man matching Kessler's description in mid-March 2000. Cash transaction. The buyer loaded it into a dark pickup alone. The freezer was never recovered. The implication tightened throats. If Melissa had been held alive for any period inside the farmhouse, a freezer could have preserved a body temporarily, slowing decomposition, buying time before burial. It would explain subtle inconsistencies in insect activity noted during autopsy. It would explain the 14-day delay before the slab was poured. Investigators searched property transfer records. No freezer was listed in estate inventories after Kessler's death. His belongings had been sold piecemeal at auction in 2013. The auction house had minimal documentation. Most buyers paid cash. No itemized list survived. Somewhere, possibly long destroyed, that freezer had existed. The farmhouse itself yielded another overlooked detail. While reviewing old crime scene photographs from 2000, taken before Melissa's disappearance, during a minor theft report unrelated to Kessler, analysts noticed a detail on the barn wall. A hook system mounted near ceiling height. Sturdy. Reinforced. Its purpose unclear. By the time of the 2022 excavation, that interior structure had been remodeled. Hooks gone. Walls replaced. The past scraped away. The possibility of restraint lingered in uncomfortable silence. Meanwhile, the re-examination of other missing women intensified. One case in particular drew attention. April Henson, 24, vanished in 1997 after leaving a gas station along Route 22. Her body was found months later, in a wooded area near Perry County. Cause of death, blunt force trauma. No suspect ever charged. Evidence from 1997 had been preserved minimally, but a single hair sample recovered from April's jacket had never been fully profiled due to technological limits of the time. In 2023, that sample was retested. The lab worked carefully, aware of the weight attached to every strand. The result, insufficient DNA for definitive identification. The sample was too degraded. But mitochondrial markers could not exclude Thomas Kessler as a contributor. Not exclusion is not confirmation. But patterns were no longer hypothetical. Media outlets began using a phrase investigators avoided publicly: potential serial offender. The sheriff declined to speculate. "We follow evidence," he said. But internally, a behavioral analyst was assigned to construct a retrospective profile of Kessler. The profile painted a chilling arc: socially isolated male, history of alcohol abuse, escalating anger after rejection, geographic familiarity with rural concealment sites, ability to perform manual labor tasks like digging and pouring concrete, comfort operating alone. Predatory but controlled. Opportunistic but organized. Melissa may not have been his first violent encounter. She may have been the first he needed to permanently silence. The breathing call at 3:17 a.m. took on darker significance. Audio engineers reprocessed the original tape with 2023 enhancement tools. Beneath the static and breathing, a faint secondary sound emerged, 3 short metallic clicks in sequence. A turn signal. Click. 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 If accurate, it suggested the call was made from inside a vehicle with a blinker engaged. Perhaps while pulled to the roadside. Perhaps while turning. Which meant Melissa may have been inside that vehicle during the call. Alive. The realization rippled outward like cold water. Investigators mapped likely pull-off points along the route from her home to Zanesville where someone might stop briefly without drawing attention. Several rural intersections matched. One in particular, an abandoned grain elevator lot, sat within cell tower triangulation range consistent with the faint ping recorded at 3:18 a.m. Search teams combed the area. Metal detectors swept for discarded items. Nothing definitive surfaced. Time erodes more than memory. Kessler's financial records from early 2000 showed a withdrawal of $4,000 cash on March 15. No clear purpose. No large purchases besides cement and the freezer. Cash disappears easily. Did he intend to flee? Did he consider releasing her? Did something change? The autopsy's blunt force trauma suggested escalation, rage overtaking control. Perhaps she resisted one final time. Perhaps he lost patience. Without confession, motive remains an outline filled with conjecture. In private moments, Hargrove revisited the farmhouse photographs taken before excavation. He zoomed into corners, shadows, textures. He imagined Melissa inside those walls, measuring time by fear, by fading hope. He also imagined the moment Kessler decided to pour concrete. That act required planning, purchase, labor. It was not impulsive. It was calculated concealment, which suggests consciousness of guilt from the beginning. The Avery family asked one question repeatedly after the remains were identified: did she suffer? The medical examiner answered with measured honesty. There is no evidence of prolonged torture, he said. But she fought. Fought. That word settled differently than closure. In early 2024, investigators received an anonymous letter postmarked Columbus. The envelope contained no return address. Inside, a single line written in block letters: he was not alone. No fingerprints. No usable DNA on the paper. The ink common. The handwriting unremarkable. Most anonymous tips dissolve into noise. But this one struck a nerve. Could someone have helped pour the slab? Mercer, the drinking companion, had admitted assisting with a burn barrel, but denied knowledge of anything else. He was re-interviewed under polygraph. Results inconclusive. Concrete pouring for an 8x10 slab is possible alone, but difficult. Investigators re-examined phone records around March 28, 2000. One incoming call to Kessler's landline stood out, 6 minutes long, placed from a number belonging to a local contractor known to do odd jobs for cash. The contractor, now deceased, had a son still living in the area. The son insisted his father never mentioned helping with anything suspicious. Again, possibility without proof. The letter remained unsolved, its origin unknown. A cruel prank. A buried conscience surfacing too late. As years passed since the slab was opened, Melissa's case transformed from missing person mystery to confirmed homicide solved by science and persistence. Yet even with her remains recovered, the narrative retains shadows. There are still 14 days only partially explained. There is still a freezer unaccounted for. There are still other women whose files sit open along the same highways. And there is still that 11-second call, breathing, metallic clicks, silence. Ohio 2000 cold case breakthrough. Yes. But breakthroughs fracture, as much as they reveal. Because when concrete cracks open after decades, it does not just release a body. It releases questions that refuse to stay buried. The letter changed everything. He was not alone. 5 words. Block letters. No signature. No return address. Postmarked Columbus. It arrived 3 months after Melissa Avery was finally laid to rest, just as the county was beginning to exhale. Detectives have a rule about anonymous tips: assume nothing, dismiss nothing. Most are noise. Some are guilt leaking through cracks. Hargrove read the line over and over until the letters felt carved into his skull. Not alone. If true, it meant conspiracy. Assistance. A witness who had carried silence for 23 years. The first question was practical. Could Kessler have physically managed everything alone? Abduction. Possible captivity. Control of a resisting adult woman. Purchase and transport of a large chest freezer. Excavation of a grave. Mixing and pouring thousands of pounds of concrete. Positioning a body. Sealing it clean. Possible, yes. Easy. No. The concrete slab measured 8 by 10 feet, 4 inches thick in most sections. Rough calculation placed the required concrete volume at nearly 1 cubic yard. Mixing that amount with a rented mixer would take hours. Lifting and leveling it alone would be grueling. But difficulty is not impossibility. Investigators reconstructed the timeline of March 28 to 29, 2000 minute by minute. The cement purchase receipt was time-stamped 4:12 p.m. March 26. The mixer rental began 8 a.m. March 27, returned late morning March 29. That gave Kessler at least a full-day window. Phone records showed limited outgoing calls during that period. No emergency services. No obvious accomplice coordination. Still, the 6-minute call to the local contractor lingered. Detectives reopened that thread. The contractor, Harold "Hal" Brennan, had died in 2011. Known locally as a handyman willing to pour small slabs for cash. His son, Mark Brennan, agreed reluctantly to another interview in 2024. "My dad did jobs all over the county," Mark said. He kept notebooks. Notebooks. Boxes of old spiral-bound ledgers were retrieved from Mark's attic. Pages brittle. Ink faded but legible in places. Most entries were mundane: fence repair, gutter cleaning, minor masonry. Then, in a March 2000 section, an entry caught attention. TK slab help cash, $300. No address listed. Just initials. TK. Thomas Kessler. The date beside it, March 28. Hargrove felt the temperature drop in the room. Mark Brennan insisted he never knew what the slab was for. "Dad didn't ask questions," he said. "He poured what people paid him to pour." Investigators compared handwriting. The initials matched Brennan's script. The entry aligned with the 6-minute call log. Payment amount consistent with a small slab assist. If Hal Brennan helped pour that concrete, he may have unknowingly sealed a grave. Or knowingly. Without Hal alive, intent remained speculation. But the letter's claim, "he was not alone," no longer sounded abstract. Detectives located 2 former employees who occasionally assisted Brennan on jobs. Both denied involvement at Kessler's property. Neither remembered that specific date. One admitted it was possible Brennan worked alone frequently. So the working theory shifted. Brennan may have helped mix and level concrete without knowledge of what lay beneath. Kessler, having already buried Melissa, needed muscle, not confession. Still, investigators examined whether Brennan had visited the farmhouse interior. Did he see disturbed earth before the pour? Did he question it? No evidence answered that. The freezer thread resurfaced next. Auction records from 2013 were incomplete, but a breakthrough came from an unexpected source, a retired appliance repair technician who serviced rural properties in early 2000s. After seeing renewed coverage, he contacted the sheriff's office. "I remember fixing a chest freezer out near that farmhouse," he said. "Guy complained it wouldn't hold temperature." The technician's service log confirmed a March 22, 2000 visit to Kessler's rental address. The freezer had a faulty seal. He replaced the gasket. He noted in the margin, "strong odor inside." "Like what?" detectives asked. "Like something spoiled," he replied. "I assumed meat." He said he hunted. March 22. 8 days after Melissa disappeared. If she had been alive when taken, and if she died within days, the freezer could have been used to delay decomposition until burial preparations were complete. The odor suggests contents. The timing suggests concealment. The technician had entered the barn area briefly where the freezer was stored. He saw nothing else unusual. But memory after 2 decades bends under pressure. Investigators attempted to track the freezer's post-2013 buyer. Auction photos were non-existent. Payment records cash. The trail ended in silence. Another shadow. Meanwhile, the reopened April Henson case yielded partial new information. Advanced probabilistic modeling compared geographic patterns of both disappearances. The overlap probability exceeded random distribution significantly. Same highway corridor. Similar victim profile. Same time of night. But without definitive DNA linkage, April's case remained officially separate. The possibility of multiple victims gnawed at the edges of the investigation. In 2025, a breakthrough came not from technology, but from human guilt. Ray Mercer, the drinking companion who had helped burn items in 2000, requested a private meeting with detectives. He arrived pale, thinner, carrying a folded piece of paper. "I lied," he said. His voice shook. He admitted that on the night of March 29, 2000, he drove past the farmhouse unannounced to return a borrowed tool. He saw lights on in the barn late, around 11 p.m. He noticed a second truck parked outside. He assumed Brennan was helping with concrete. But as he approached, he heard something else. A thud. Then what he described as a muffled cry. Mercer said he froze. The sound stopped abruptly. Kessler emerged from the barn moments later, shirt stained dark. He told Mercer to leave. Mercer did. "I convinced myself I imagined it," Mercer said. "When she disappeared, I thought maybe." "Why didn't you come forward?" Hargrove asked. Mercer stared at the table. "I was scared of him." If Mercer's recollection was accurate, Melissa may have still been alive the night before the slab was fully set. That would shift the timeline of death dangerously close to the concrete pour. The medical examiner re-examined decomposition indicators with this possibility in mind. Certain preservation patterns were consistent with delayed burial, but not necessarily long-term freezing. If she died on March 28 or 29, burial immediately before the pour would align. Which means she may have been held for up to 2 weeks. 2 weeks inside that farmhouse. 2 weeks between the breathing call and the concrete. The magnitude of that possibility rippled outward like aftershock. Investigators confronted Mercer about the anonymous letter. He denied writing it. Handwriting analysis found no match. But someone had known enough to suggest accomplice presence. Speculation returned to Hal Brennan. If he saw something suspicious, if he suspected what lay beneath the slab, perhaps he carried that knowledge silently until death. Or perhaps someone else watched that barn from a distance and said nothing for decades. The case file thickened again. Publicly, the sheriff's office acknowledged Brennan had assisted with concrete work, but stated there was no evidence he knew of the burial. Legally, there was insufficient proof of complicity. Privately, the uncertainty remained corrosive. Melissa Avery's case had been cracked open by science, persistence, and a shovel cutting through concrete. Her remains were recovered. Her killer identified beyond statistical doubt. And yet the story refused to settle into neat closure. Because if she was held for 14 days, someone may have heard something. If a freezer hummed in that barn, someone may have smelled something. If concrete was poured over fresh earth, someone may have noticed the ground was newly disturbed. He was not alone. Whether that meant physical assistance or silent witnesses bound by fear, the echo of that sentence now lingers over every stretch of Route 22, over every rural slab poured in spring 2000, over every memory that has not yet surfaced. And as investigators continue peeling back layers of 2 decades of quiet, one truth grows heavier. Breaking concrete is easier than breaking silence. Silence, once fractured, doesn't mend cleanly. After Mercer's confession about the thud in the barn, the investigation shifted from forensic excavation to psychological excavation. Detectives began revisiting people who had lived within earshot of the farmhouse in March 2000, people who had once dismissed odd noises as rural background, who had convinced themselves that what they heard was machinery, livestock, wind. Memory is fragile, but guilt is durable. One neighbor, a woman now in her 70s, agreed to speak again. In 2000, she had lived half a mile down the gravel road. She remembered that spring vividly, because heavy rains had washed out part of her driveway. I heard yelling one night, she said quietly. Thought it was Tom drunk again. What kind of yelling? Hargrove asked. A woman's voice. Short. Like it was cut off. Did you report it? She shook her head. Out there, you mind your own business. The date? She couldn't be certain. Late March. Before the concrete truck rumor circulated, though there had been no concrete truck, only a rented mixer. But in small communities, rumors mutate fast. Another neighbor recalled Kessler digging behind the barn days before the slab appeared. I joked he was burying treasure, the man said. He didn't laugh. Each recollection added texture, not certainty. But texture matters. It fills in the edges of horror. Investigators turned to Kessler's psychological history. Court records revealed a restraining order filed against him in 1994 by an ex-girlfriend in Franklin County. She alleged stalking behavior, late-night calls, threats when she attempted to end the relationship. The order expired after a year. No further legal action. Detectives located the woman, now remarried, living under a different last name. She agreed to speak reluctantly. He didn't take rejection well, she said. He'd show up places. Watch from his truck. Did he ever become violent? She paused. He shoved me once. Said if I left him, no one would find me. The phrase landed like a premonition. If Kessler had escalated from threats in the 1990s to homicide in 2000, the trajectory fit a pattern of increasing control and resentment. But the 14-day gap remained the most disturbing element. Forensic reanalysis of the farmhouse property revealed faint trace evidence inside a crawlspace beneath the main house, fibers matching the blue cotton recovered from the grave. The crawlspace was accessible through a narrow panel in the hallway floor, concealed under an old rug. It was large enough for storage. Or for confinement. There was no direct biological evidence remaining. Time and remodeling had stripped most forensic potential. But soil and fiber transfer suggested items from the barn area had once been temporarily stored there. The theory crystallized. Melissa may have been held inside the house initially, then moved to the barn. Or vice versa. The crawlspace door bore faint scratch marks on its interior surface. Human. Animal. Impossible to prove conclusively. But the image was enough to haunt. Meanwhile, investigators pursued the freezer trail beyond auction records. A breakthrough emerged from scrap metal recycling logs. In 2015, 2 years after Kessler's death, a chest freezer matching the make and model purchased in March 2000 was brought to a scrapyard in Newark by a man clearing out an abandoned storage unit previously leased under Shell LLC tied loosely to Kessler's estate. The freezer had been stripped and crushed within days. No interior samples were preserved. Another door closing decades too late. The anonymous letter continued to cast a shadow. Handwriting analysts compared it against archived documents from Brennan's notebooks, Mercer's statements, and even the Avery family's old correspondence to rule out misdirection. No match. Investigators broadened scope. Could not alone refer not to physical assistance but to knowledge. Someone who suspected but chose silence. Attention turned to the Lancaster bar where Melissa was allegedly confronted weeks before her disappearance. Security footage from 2000 did not exist. But employee rosters did. A former bouncer, tracked down in 2025, remembered breaking up an argument in the parking lot that spring. Guy grabbed her arm, he said. She told him to get lost. I stepped between them. Do you recognize him? Detectives asked, sliding across an aged photo of Kessler. The bouncer studied it. Could be. Looks like him. Did he come back after that? Yeah. Alone. Sat in the corner. Watched the door. Watched. Predatory patience. If Melissa had recognized him the night he appeared at her house, she may have opened the door cautiously, not realizing how far obsession had grown. Investigators reconstructed likely abduction dynamics using behavioral modeling. Kessler may have approached under the guise of apology or conversation. When rejected again, force escalated. A weapon, perhaps blunt object from yard or truck, used to intimidate. Transport executed quickly to avoid attention. But why keep her alive for days? Possibilities ranged from control fantasy to negotiation, from rage cooling into calculation to fear of immediate discovery. Holding her would have required food, water, restraint. It also would have amplified risk. Unless he believed isolation guaranteed invisibility. The Perry County stalking report gained renewed scrutiny. The woman who escaped the dark pickup in 2001 agreed to testify if charges had ever been possible. She described the driver's eyes as flat, unemotional, evaluating. Flat eyes. Investigators examined Kessler's employment history further. In 1998, he had worked briefly at a poultry processing plant, handling equipment capable of stunning animals with blunt force. The medical examiner noted that Melissa's skull fracture pattern was consistent with a heavy cylindrical object. Circumstantial, but consistent. Then came a development no one anticipated. In late 2025, genealogical expansion linked the cigarette DNA profile not only to Kessler, but to a distant cousin in Kentucky, who had been arrested in 2004 for assault. Detectives interviewed the cousin to rule out alternative contributors. During questioning, the cousin volunteered something unexpected. Tom called me once in 2000, he said. Asked if I knew how to get rid of a car without paperwork. The cousin claimed he told Kessler he didn't. He thought it was about unpaid taxes or insurance issues. No record ever showed Kessler disposing of a vehicle in March 2000, only selling the pickup later that summer. But the inquiry suggests panic. Investigators searched junkyard records again. No confirmed match to a second vehicle. The more threads pulled, the more the tapestry revealed both clarity and chaos. Melissa Avery's murder was no longer a mystery of disappearance. It was a documented homicide concealed beneath concrete, anchored to a man whose DNA placed him at her home, and whose actions sealed her grave. Yet the full architecture of those 14 days, what was said, what was endured, whether someone else knew, remains partially obscured by time. The farmhouse stands empty now. The barn demolished. The slab removed. Grass grows where concrete once hardened. Drivers along Route 22 pass unaware of the layers beneath ordinary landscapes, how obsession can incubate in silence, how communities can overlook warning signs, how rejection can metastasize into lethal entitlement. And somewhere in the shadows of memory, the echo of that anonymous letter still lingers. He was not alone. Whether that sentence speaks of hands that helped or eyes that turned away, the weight of it refuses to dissipate. Because in cases like this, the crime is not just the act of killing. It is the years of quiet that follow. In cold cases, resolution is rarely a single moment. It is an erosion. A slow stripping away of denial, coincidence, and community myth, until only the raw framework of truth remains. By early 2026, the Avery case had moved beyond the question of who. The DNA, the purchase records, the behavioral pattern, the burial site, it formed a structure too cohesive to dismiss. But prosecutors faced a grim reality. Thomas Kessler was dead. And the law does not try ghosts. Still, District Attorney Elaine Rourke made a decision that surprised some and angered others. She would convene a public findings hearing. Not a trial, not an indictment, but a formal declaration of investigative conclusions, entered into record. For Melissa, she said. And for clarity. The courthouse in Lancaster had not seen this kind of turnout in years. Cameras lined the back wall. Former classmates of Melissa filled the pew-like benches. Her brother Daniel sat in the front row, hands clasped tight enough to blanch his knuckles. Detective Hargrove testified first. He walked the court through the chronology. March 17, 2000, cigarette butts recovered from Avery residence. March 18, last confirmed sighting. March 19 to April 2, unaccounted period. March 24, Kessler purchases industrial freezer. March 29, concrete slab poured in barn. 2013, Kessler's death. 2025, forensic excavation. DNA confirmation. The timeline no longer drifted loosely. It locked. Forensic specialists explained the fracture pattern to the skull. The entomologist described insect colonization consistent with delayed burial. The genealogical analyst outlined the painstaking process that traced a degraded cigarette profile through distant relatives to Kessler's lineage. Each detail pressed the narrative into permanence. Then came the crawlspace evidence. Photographs of the scratch marks were displayed. Enlarged. Stark. The courtroom fell into a hush that felt physical. The medical examiner was careful, measured. "We cannot state conclusively that confinement occurred," she said. However, environmental transfer patterns strongly suggest the victim remained above ground for several days prior to burial. Several days. The words settled heavily. The anonymous letter was introduced as contextual evidence. Its origin still unknown. Its claim still unresolved. He was not alone. Detective Hargrove addressed it directly. "We have found no forensic evidence of a second perpetrator participating in the homicide or burial," he said. "However, we cannot exclude the possibility that someone possessed knowledge and failed to report it." There it was, the legal line between suspicion and proof. After 3 hours of testimony, District Attorney Rourke delivered her statement. Based on the totality of evidence, DNA, purchase records, behavioral history, witness recollection, burial concealment, and forensic reconstruction, the Commonwealth formally concludes that Thomas Edward Kessler abducted, unlawfully confined, and murdered Melissa Avery in March of 2000. The words were not shouted. They did not need to be. They entered the record like a stone dropped into still water. No gavel marked closure. No defendant stood to receive sentence. But for the first time in 26 years, Melissa Avery's name was attached not to disappearance, but to truth. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed. Some focused on the technology, familial DNA, cold case excavation techniques, soil chemistry analysis. Others asked about accountability. Does this bring justice? One reporter asked Daniel Avery. He took a long breath before answering. It brings honesty, he said. Justice would have been my sister growing old. That night, something unexpected happened. Another letter arrived. This one not anonymous. It was postmarked from Kentucky. Handwritten. Signed. The distant cousin. In the letter, he elaborated on the phone call from 2000. He described Kessler's voice as strained. Said Tom had asked strange hypothetical questions about concrete curing time, about whether lime dissolved tissue faster than soil alone. Questions that now felt less hypothetical. At the end of the letter, one sentence stood out. He told me once that people disappear easier than you think when everyone assumes they ran away. Investigators verified the letter's authenticity. No new charges could emerge. But it added psychological weight to an already heavy file. Meanwhile, a volunteer group began organizing a memorial at the site where the barn once stood. With permission from the current landowner, they installed a simple plaque. Melissa and Avery. 1978 to 2000. You were never forgotten. The field around it remains quiet. But quiet is no longer the same as silence. In the months following the hearing, 2 additional women came forward, women who had experienced intimidation from Kessler in the late 1990s, but had never reported it formally. One described him following her home from a gas station. Another recalled him parking outside her workplace repeatedly. Patterns. Patterns that might have escalated further had Melissa not crossed his path. Behavioral analysts reviewing the case now classify Kessler as an organized, control-motivated offender, likely harboring resentment toward women who rejected him, comfortable operating alone, confident in rural concealment strategies. The 14-day gap remains the darkest chamber. Was it captivity? Interrogation? Delusion? A desperate attempt to coerce affection? Or something colder, calculated waiting until search momentum waned before burial? We may never know. But what the excavation unearthed was more than remains. It unearthed a warning. About dismissed stalking. About the myth of harmless obsession. About how small-town discretion can morph into collective blind spots. And about time. Time does not always heal. Sometimes it preserves. The Avery file now sits closed, technically resolved, legally dormant. But for those who lived through the early spring of 2000, the memory lingers in subtle ways, in the way doors are double-checked at night, in the way arguments in parking lots draw sharper attention, in the way silence is no longer trusted blindly. Melissa's case was never about a random disappearance. It was about proximity. About entitlement. About escalation ignored until it became irreversible. And perhaps the most unsettling truth of all. The man who buried her under concrete attended church potlucks. Paid taxes. Waved to neighbors. Monsters do not always roar. Sometimes, they pour foundations. And wait. Cold cases do not end when the file is stamped closed. They echo. They stretch backward and forward at the same time, pulling at details that once seemed harmless, now radioactive under the light of hindsight. By spring of 2026, Ohio had begun to treat the Avery case as a symbol, a textbook cold case breakthrough, a triumph of forensic genealogy, a lesson in patience. News panels dissected the timeline. Podcasts replayed the discovery of the concrete slab. Headlines repeated the phrase, "Justice after 26 years." But in Lancaster, the word justice still felt unfinished. Because the 14 days were still missing. And missing time is where nightmares breed. Detective Hargrove returned to the barn property alone one evening in late April. The field had already begun to green again, stubbornly alive. The barn structure was gone now, dismantled after the excavation. Only churned earth and a pale scar in the soil remained. He stood where the slab had been. 14 days. He replayed the search logs from March 2000. Officers canvassed the area 3 times. Helicopters flew overhead. Kessler himself had spoken to volunteers, pointing toward wooded trails, suggesting she might have hitchhiked. He had stood within yards of her body. And no one knew. That realization had begun to gnaw at more than just Hargrove. A retired deputy named Carl Minton contacted the task force in May. He had been one of the first officers to knock on Kessler's door back in 2000. He requested a private meeting. In the interview room, Minton's voice carried something fragile, not fear, but regret. He was too calm, Minton said. I remember thinking it. Everyone else was anxious. Parents were frantic. He just answered questions like it was a zoning dispute. Minton described stepping into the barn briefly during that original canvass. He had noticed fresh lumber stacked along the wall. I asked what he was building, Minton said. He told me he was reinforcing a section of flooring for equipment storage. Equipment. The word now felt obscene. Back in 2000, no warrant was issued. No probable cause. A man building a barn floor was not a crime. But hindsight is merciless. Forensic accountants, encouraged by renewed media attention, began combing through Kessler's archived financial history again. Most of it had already been reviewed. Yet one small transaction resurfaced. A cash withdrawal of $3,000 on March 18, 2000. Unusual for him. The bank branch was local. Surveillance footage from that era no longer existed. The money was never traced. $3,000. For what? Investigators theorized possibilities. Supplies not tied to identifiable purchase records. Payment. Silence. Or perhaps something more mundane. Cold cases live in that ambiguity, where every unexplained detail feels loaded, even when it may not be. The anonymous letter resurfaced in conversation among the task force. He was not alone. The phrasing was deliberate. Not they. Not we. He was not alone. Which suggested presence, not partnership. Could someone have known? Seen? Suspected? A new tip line reopened briefly. Most calls were noise, conspiracy theories, false memories amplified by documentaries. But one call stood out. A woman named Patricia Sloan. She had dated Kessler casually in late 1999. The relationship ended abruptly in February 2000. He didn't like being told no, she said flatly. He once said if someone embarrassed him publicly, he'd make them regret it. Melissa had publicly rejected him at a house party 2 weeks before her disappearance. Multiple witnesses had confirmed it at the time, but dismissed it as awkward flirting gone wrong. Patterns again. Control. Humiliation. Retaliation. Patricia also described something investigators had never heard before. A padlock installed on an interior storage room in Kessler's basement during their relationship. She never saw inside. He joked that it was for expensive tools. When officers searched the house in 2000, that storage room contained only shelving. No padlock. No anomalies recorded. Could the confinement have occurred there before relocation to the barn? Forensic teams revisited archived crime scene photos. The basement walls showed faint discoloration near a drain. No luminol had been used at the time. It was standard practice, but the search had not extended to full forensic sweep without probable cause. Now the house belonged to new owners. Consent was obtained for limited forensic testing. Ground-penetrating radar found nothing beneath the basement slab. But swabs from the drain trap yielded degraded biological material. Too compromised for definitive DNA extraction. Another door closed just before it opened. Media attention intensified again. Commentators debated whether the original investigation had failed. Whether small-town assumptions protected Kessler for too long. Hargrove resisted the urge to assign blame backward. In 2000, they lacked what 2025 provided: genetic genealogy databases, improved soil decomposition modeling, digital record cross-referencing. They worked with what they had. But technology does not erase consequence. Daniel Avery began visiting high schools, speaking about stalking awareness and early reporting. He carried a photo of Melissa in his jacket pocket, the same senior portrait that once hung on missing person posters. He did not speak about rage. He spoke about vigilance. Pay attention to discomfort, he told students. Don't normalize obsession. The memorial site became a quiet pilgrimage. Flowers appeared. Notes. One read, "We believe you." Belief. It had taken 26 years to crystallize into proof. In June, a journalist uncovered something buried deep in archived police logs. A noise complaint filed by a neighbor of Kessler on March 21, 2000. The complaint described metal banging sounds late at night coming from the barn. Officers responded. No citation issued. The report noted, homeowner states he is securing loose roofing panels. March 21. Day 4. If Melissa was alive during that period, the sound of metal could have meant something else entirely. Speculation cannot convict the dead. But it can haunt the living. As summer approached, Lancaster settled into a new normal, one shaped by clarity yet shadowed by the days unaccounted for. The official narrative had solidified: abduction, confinement, murder, burial under concrete. But within that structure remained a hollow space. 14 days long. And perhaps that hollow is what keeps the story alive. Because closure, when it arrives decades late, is imperfect. It confirms the monster. It outlines the method. It names the victim. But it rarely explains the silence between screams. And somewhere in that silence, in the space between March 18 and March 29 of 2000, lies the final chapter no forensic tool can reconstruct: the human moments, the fear, the choices made in darkness. The field in Lancaster is quiet again. But anyone who knows the timeline understands. For 14 days, it wasn't. There is a particular kind of dread that comes after the headlines fade. Not the sharp panic of discovery. Not the explosive shock of excavation. But the slow, invasive realization that a solved case can still leave questions sharp enough to cut. By late summer 2026, Ohio had largely moved on. Other crimes filled the broadcasts. Other tragedies claimed airtime. The Avery case became a documentary segment, a podcast arc, a chapter in forensic seminars. But for those who had walked through March of 2000 in real time, something had shifted permanently. Because once you know the monster had a basement, you start wondering what else was stored there. The re-examination of Kessler's life did not stop with Melissa. Investigators quietly reviewed unsolved disappearances within a 100-mile radius between 1995 and 2005. Not because evidence demanded it, but because patterns rarely exist in isolation. 2 names surfaced. Angela Whitmore. Missing, 1998. Age 21. Last seen leaving a grocery store 30 miles north of Lancaster. Heather Dunn. Missing, 2004. Age 19. Case status, unresolved. Vehicle found abandoned near a rural highway. Neither case had direct links to Kessler. But geography overlapped. Timelines brushed shoulders. And behavioral analysts began constructing a possibility no one wanted to articulate publicly. Was Melissa the first? Or simply the only one found? Detective Hargrove resisted speculation. He had seen cold cases derail under the weight of imagination. But he authorized a limited comparison review. DNA from both missing persons had been entered into CODIS years ago. No matches surfaced from Kessler's known samples. Still, absence of evidence is not absolution. Meanwhile, the cousin from Kentucky agreed to a recorded follow-up interview. This time, investigators pressed deeper. Did Tom ever mention other incidents? Hargrove asked. The cousin hesitated. He used to complain about women making him look stupid, he said finally. Said people underestimated him. Said one day they'd see. They'd see. The phrasing lingered. Psychologists studying posthumous offender profiles often note a pattern of grievance, a belief that the world has inflicted humiliation and retaliation restores balance. Melissa's public rejection, at that party in early March 2000 now felt less like a moment of awkwardness and more like ignition. But ignition requires preparation. Kessler had purchased the freezer 6 days after her disappearance. Concrete 5 days after that. Lime. Tools. Supplies. The timeline suggested planning beyond impulse. Which meant one terrifying possibility. He may have anticipated the act before it occurred. In September, a former co-worker from the agricultural supply store where Kessler once worked contacted authorities. He described an incident in late 1999 involving a dispute with a female employee. He cornered her in the loading area, the co-worker said. Nothing physical. Just intense. Like he was trying to make her afraid. She left the job weeks later. No report was filed. Back then, intimidation did not carry the weight it does now. Back then, discomfort was minimized. The pattern hardened. Isolation. Resentment. Escalation. The 14-day gap began to feel less chaotic, more controlled. Investigators reconstructed a hypothetical sequence using forensic and behavioral modeling. Abduction on March 18. Temporary confinement, likely basement. Psychological manipulation. Possible restraint. Delay in burial until search intensity decreased. The metal banging reported March 21. The cash withdrawal March 18. The freezer purchase March 24. Each piece locked with a cold precision. But still, no witness ever reported hearing screams. No one saw her car near his house. No direct forensic evidence placed her inside the basement conclusively. The case was solved in structure. But human experience, the lived horror, remained invisible. In October, the Avery family held a private ceremony at the memorial site. No cameras. No press. Just wind moving through harvested fields and a small gathering of those who had never stopped remembering. Daniel spoke quietly. 4 years, we thought she might still be out there, he said. Somewhere alive. Waiting. That hope was torture. But it kept her human. Now hope had been replaced by certainty. Certainty is heavier. After the ceremony, Daniel remained behind alone. He traced the engraved letters on the plaque with his thumb. 1978 to 2000. A life compressed into numbers. He later admitted something to a journalist that few expected. "There's a part of me that hates that he died in 2013, Daniel said. He never had to hear it. Never had to sit in a courtroom and listen to what he did." Kessler's death, a heart attack at 52, had seemed mundane at the time. Now it felt like an escape hatch. No cross-examination. No confession. No prison cell. Just silence. But silence has a way of betraying itself over time. In November 2026, a digital forensic analyst reviewing archived email backups from Kessler's old desktop uncovered something overlooked. A draft message never sent. Time-stamped March 22, 2000. The message contained no recipient. Just a single line typed, then deleted, then retyped. "They'll believe what I tell them." The file had been recovered from a fragmented hard drive sector, nearly erased, but preserved by chance. It was not a confession. It was not evidence admissible in court. But it was something worse. It was mindset. Control over narrative. Confidence in deception. "They'll believe what I tell them." And they had. For 26 years. As winter approached again, Lancaster prepared for another anniversary, 27 years since Melissa Avery vanished into what was once described as thin air. But there is no thin air in this story. There was a basement. A barn. Concrete. Metal. Time. And a man who believed he could script reality. The case file now occupies a different shelf in the records room, marked "cleared by exceptional means." The legal phrasing for a suspect deceased. Exceptional means. An antiseptic label for a horror that lived under concrete for decades. Yet even now, some nights in Lancaster carry a certain tension. A reminder that evil did not announce itself loudly. It did not roar through alleyways. It smiled politely. It answered doors calmly. It poured foundations methodically. And for 14 days in March 2000, behind walls that looked ordinary from the outside, something unspeakable unfolded while neighbors slept, while search parties marched past, while belief tilted toward runaway theories instead of rage. The breakthrough came. The name was spoken. The truth surfaced. But the echo remains, not because the case is unsolved anymore, but because the silence that allowed it to happen feels disturbingly familiar. And somewhere in the back of every mind that followed the Avery case, one thought lingers, quiet and relentless. How many other foundations have we never questioned? By the time the 27th anniversary arrived in March 2027, the word breakthrough had lost its shine. It still appeared in headlines. It still opened conference lectures. But in Lancaster, it felt different now, less like victory, more like excavation. Because once a community learns what was buried beneath its feet, it begins to question everything that feels solid. The anniversary vigil drew a larger crowd than expected. Not because the case was fresh again, but because time had finally made it safe to stand openly in grief. For years, people had been cautious. Hope complicates mourning. But certainty changes posture. Candles lined the edge of the field where the barn once stood. The wind moved through them, bending flames, but never quite extinguishing them. Daniel Avery spoke again, but this time his voice carried less strain. "Truth doesn't fix it," he said. "But it stops the wondering." And wondering had been the true torment. Not knowing if Melissa was cold or afraid. Not knowing if she was alive somewhere, trapped in a story no one could hear. Not knowing if someone was lying directly to their faces. Now they knew. But knowledge had begun to widen, not narrow. 2 weeks after the vigil, investigators quietly reopened the Angela Whitmore file. There was no announcement. No press conference. Just a transfer of documents from a dusty county archive to the Cold Case Task Force office in Columbus. Angela had vanished from a grocery store parking lot in 1998. Her car remained locked. Purse inside. Keys missing. Security footage from that era had been grainy, inconclusive. What had changed was proximity. A map pinned to the task force wall now displayed 3 red markers: Lancaster, Chillicothe, Circleville. All within driving distance of Kessler's farm. Cell phone data did not exist for him in 1998. He had used landlines exclusively. Credit card logs from that period were sparse. But employment records confirmed something investigators had overlooked years earlier. In October 1998, Kessler had delivered agricultural equipment to a supplier in Chillicothe, the same town where Angela was last seen. Coincidence remains the most dangerous word in cold case work. It tempts, it distorts, it suggests patterns where none may exist. But sometimes coincidence is simply the shadow of repetition. Angela's case file included a witness statement from a cashier who remembered a quiet man lingering near the store exit that afternoon. She described him as average height, brown hair, kind of forgettable. Forgettable. The description fit thousands, including Kessler. Forensic genealogy could not assist. No remains had ever been found. Heather Dunn's case proved equally resistant. She vanished in 2004, 4 years after Melissa. Kessler would have been 43 then. Still physically capable. Still living on the same property. But investigators found something new. A toll booth receipt recovered from archived financial documents placed Kessler on Interstate 71 the night Heather disappeared. The toll was logged within an hour of the time her car was discovered abandoned. Again, not proof, but proximity. The pattern tightened like a slow fist. Hargrove refused to let speculation outrun evidence. Yet he authorized soil sampling on a section of Kessler's former property not previously excavated, an overgrown patch near a collapsed shed behind the barn site. Ground-penetrating radar revealed disturbances consistent with past digging. The excavation lasted 3 days. The press caught wind of it by day 2. Speculation exploded. But when the dig concluded, only animal remains surfaced, livestock buried decades earlier. Relief washed over some. Disappointment over others. Because clarity, even terrible clarity, feels cleaner than uncertainty. Back in Lancaster, life continued in visible ways. New businesses opened. Streets were repaved. Children who had not been born in 2000 now learned about the Avery case in local history discussions. And something subtle shifted in those conversations. Melissa was no longer just the missing girl. She was the girl who was found. Found not alive, but found. There is power in that distinction. Meanwhile, the anonymous letter remained unsolved. Handwriting analysis yielded nothing definitive. Postmark data pointed to a regional processing center used by thousands. The phrase, "he was not alone," echoed louder as investigators revisited witness interviews from 2000. One name resurfaced repeatedly in old notes: Raymond Keel. Keel had been Kessler's occasional hunting partner. Questioned briefly in 2000. Cleared after stating he had not seen Kessler during the week of the disappearance. Keel, now 67, agreed to a voluntary interview. He appeared tired before the first question was asked. "I didn't know anything," he insisted early. If I did, I'd have said something. But when pressed about the barn construction, about the noise complaint, about the sudden reinforcement of flooring, he hesitated. He told me he needed help pouring concrete, Keel admitted. I said no. My back was bad. He didn't press. Did you ask why? Hargrove asked. Keel looked down at his hands. He said it was for stability. That's all. The interview ended without confession. But something in Keel's demeanor unsettled investigators, not guilt, exactly, but discomfort. The kind that lingers around proximity to wrongdoing without direct participation. Could not alone mean someone who suspected but chose silence. Legally, silence is not homicide. Morally, it feels heavier. Forensic psychologists reviewing the case proposed another possibility. The phrase may have referred not to accomplice, but to captivity. If Melissa had been alive during those 14 days, she was not alone in the world. She was alone with him. And perhaps the letter writer meant something simpler. More haunting. He was not alone in that barn, because she was there. Still breathing. Still resisting. The thought reframed the entire sentence. Winter bled into spring again. The farmland thawed. The memorial plaque weathered slightly at the edges. Hargrove visited it one morning without announcing it to anyone. He stood in silence, the way investigators sometimes do when a case stops being procedural and becomes personal. 26 years is enough time for a child to become a parent. Enough time for a town to forget its own fear. Enough time for concrete to seem permanent. But truth does not respect permanence. It seeps. Through soil. Through archives. Through memory. The Avery case had been declared solved. Officially. Publicly. Legally. Yet it continued to unfold, not because evidence demanded it, but because human conscience does. And somewhere between what could be proven and what could only be felt, the final weight of March 2000 still pressed down. Not as chaos. Not as mystery. But as a quiet, enduring question. Who else looked away?